Welcome to The Explainer. Today I'm putting on my mechanic's hat and we're actually going to put a very special guest in the hot seat. Literally. I'm talking about something you probably have sitting out in your driveway right now, the seemingly mundane spark plug. But, don't let its tiny size fool you. If I were hosting a talk show and could actually sit down to interview a spark plug, the crazy stories it would tell. This little component is the high-stakes, microscopic heart of your vehicle's engine. It's responsible for perfectly sealing in miniature explosions thousands of times a minute. And as we're about to see, the margin for error here, it's practically invisible to the naked eye. Okay, let's dive into this. Can a single drop of grease or a sub-millimeter gapping error catastrophically destroy your engine? I mean, it sounds like a massive exaggeration, right? But the reality is that common, everyday DIY maintenance mistakes, the stuff maybe your grandfather taught you to do in the garage, can literally tear the threads right out of your cylinder head, leading to incredibly severe, not to mention expensive, consequences. To understand why, we're breaking today's explainer down into 5 chronological steps. We'll start with the heart of combustion, move into reading the telltale tips, dodge the gapping tool trap, tackle the anti-seize controversy, and finally, lock it down with precision torque and installation. Let's get right to it. Section 1. The heart of combustion, the brutal environment. So a spark plug doesn't just casually provide a spark. It has to somehow survive inside a violent, almost otherworldly environment. We are talking about intense engine heat, moisture, highly pressurized combustion gases, and massive high voltage. Over time, this constant, brutal barrage inevitably breaks down even the absolute toughest components. That is exactly why you start experiencing things like misfires, rough idling, and severe power loss when they wear out. And it's why changing your spark plugs every 30,000 to 100,000 miles is absolutely vital. If you leave them in too long, the moisture and heat cause the metal to rust, leading to something called thread galling. That's a terrifying scenario where the spark plug threads literally fuse and bond with your engine's cylinder head. Moving on to Section 2, reading the telltale tips, crime scene evidence. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when we pull that plug out for an interrogation. A spark plug tip is basically a tiny diary of everything happening inside your engine's cylinders. The color, the texture, the buildup, it all reflects the performance of either a perfectly well-tuned machine or one that is silently screaming for help. Let's play forensic investigator and decode some of the most surprising findings here. If you pull a plug and see a red coating, don't panic. That's totally normal. It's just from additives in unleaded fuel. But if you see thick, dry black soot, that's carbon fouling. It's telling us your fuel mixture is running way too rich, or maybe you only take super short trips to the grocery store. If the tip looks shiny and yellowed, that's called glazing, meaning your plug is operating way too hot at high speeds. But here is the really crucial point. If you pull a plug and it is covered in heavy wet oil or shows actual physical damage where the electrode is smashed, you're looking at massive underlying engine failures. The plug is just the messenger at that point. Section 3. The gapping tool trap, microscopic margins. The gap, which is the tiny space where the spark actually has to jump, is critical. Too wide and your ignition system strains itself to death. Too small and the fuel just won't fully ignite. Now, modern spark plugs achieve incredible efficiency by using precious metals like platinum, iridium, and ruthenium. These metals have super high melting points, which lets manufacturers make the center electrode incredibly small. We're talking typically under 1 single millimeter in diameter. But here is the catch. While they are incredibly hard and heat-resistant, they are extremely fragile to lateral force. If you apply the wrong pressure, that tiny tip will literally snap right off. Which brings us to a massive yet incredibly common mistake. You know those cheap, circular, coin-style gapping tools sitting on the counter at the auto parts store? Those are perfectly fine for older, thick, traditional copper or nickel plugs. But if you use the ramp of an old-school coin gapper to wedge open and widen a modern precious metal plug, no way. You risk applying lateral force and destroying that coating or just snapping the tip entirely. The safe, accurate method for modern plugs is using a wire-type gauge or a feeler gauge, carefully bending the ground strap without ever letting your tool touch that fragile center electrode. Section 4. The anti-seize controversy, the engine killer. I want you to consider this question carefully because it sparks massive debates. Should you lubricate spark plug threads before installation to prevent them from getting stuck? For generations, old-school mechanics have sworn by adding just a little dab of anti-seize compound to the threads. I mean, it makes logical sense, right? You obviously don't want them rusting in place. Well, prepare for a twist. If you ask the modern manufacturers themselves, companies like Bosch and Autolite, the expert consensus is a resounding, definitive no. In fact, Bosch explicitly warns, do not use any grease, oil, or anti-seize. This may result in inaccurately torquing. The reason is that grease acts like an adhesive and a lubricant all at the same time. It totally throws off the friction that your torque wrench is actively relying on. So by the time your wrench finally clicks, you've actually pushed way, way past the safe tightness limit. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer scale of the damage. Take a look at this microphotography from NGK. This is a 10mm spark plug that was installed with anti-seize. Because that lubricant completely bypassed the normal friction, the installer accidentally over-tightened it. You can actually see the horrific microfractures, the totally compressed gasket, and the way the threads have completely snapped and stretched in the direction of tightening. Applying anti-seize here literally destroyed the structural integrity of the solid metal. However, there is exactly one exception to this rule, and it's a crucial one. NGK notes that if you happen to be using an older style plug that has a dull, black, unplated metal body, it offers zero protection against seizing. In that specific case, you actually do need anti-seize. But if your plug has a shiny silver, zinc, or nickel plating, like almost all modern plugs do today, that shiny plating is actually a built-in breakaway lubricant. It's designed specifically to prevent seizing on its own. So those shiny plugs, they must be installed completely dry.
Section 5, Precision Torque and Installation, the final seal.
Okay, installing the new plug is a highly methodical process. First, before you even take the old plug all the way out of the engine, you must clean the seat area with a blast of compressed air. If you skip this, dirt and debris sitting around the plug will fall directly down the open hole right into your combustion chamber, scoring your cylinder walls. Definitely don't want that. Next, always hand tighten the new plugs to prevent cross-threading. And finally, use a calibrated torque wrench and stop immediately at the click. But hey, what if you were in a pinch and don't own a torque wrench? Well, the manufacturers have actually mapped out the exact geometry for us. If you have a small 10mm plug with a compressible gasket seat, once the plug is finger tight, meaning you literally can't turn it anymore with just your bare fingers, you apply exactly 1/4 of a turn with your wrench. No more, no less. Let's move to and see how this builds when we scale up. This rotation geometry changes depending on the size of the plug. For larger 14 and 18mm spark plugs that have gasket seats, it requires double that rotation. You turn it exactly 1/2 turn past finger tight. That specific rotation is exactly what's needed to properly crush the gasket and create that vital gas-tight seal. And then we have tapered seats, which don't use a crushable metal gasket at all. A tapered seat requires a remarkably delicate 1/16 of a turn past finger tight. I mean, that is barely a nudge. It really highlights the extreme delicacy of this entire process. It takes almost no movement at all to lock a tapered plug safely into the cylinder head. So, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the high stakes of missing these torque specs. If you leave it too loose, the lack of gas tightness allows superheated combustion gases to leak right past the threads, which causes internal corrosion and a catastrophic loss of engine compression. But if you make it too tight, you distort the metal shell, cause thread galling, and potentially destroy the threads right out of your expensive cylinder head. This isn't just about screwing in a bolt, folks. It's about properly sealing a miniature explosion. Which brings us to the end of our journey into the microscopic mechanics of combustion. We've seen just how violent the environment is, how incredibly delicate the gapping process must be, and why something as simple as adding old-school grease can totally ruin a modern engine. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought. Next time you're out in the driveway, ask yourself, what hidden story are your engine spark plugs trying to tell you right now? Pop the hood, pull a plug, and find out for yourself. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer. Keep asking questions, keep looking closely, and I'll catch you on the next one.